Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this special meeting of the Hampstead School Board, Wednesday, January 6, 2021. Before we begin, I'm going to read our COVID statement. As chair of the Hampstead School Board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are A, providing public access to the meeting by telephone. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen to this meeting by dialing the following phone number, 888-475-4499 or 877-853-5257. B, providing public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting. We previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing the meeting, including how to access the meeting using Zoom telephonetically. Instructions have also been provided on the district website at hsdschools.net. C, providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anybody has a problem, please email hmstechnology@hsdschools.net. D, adjourning the meeting if the public is unable to access the meeting. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. We will start the meeting with roll call attendance. Melissa, when you're ready.
Thank you. Megan Malcolm?
I'm here, alone in the room, other family in the house.
Caitlin Parnell?
Here, I'm alone in the room. There are other members of my family in the house.
David Smith?
Here, alone in the room with others in the house.
Jim Sweeney?
Hi, alone in the room, others in the house. Thank you.
Karen Yusenka?
Hi, I'm alone in my office. There are other family members in the house.
And Executive Consultant, Dr. Earl Metzler?
Present in my home office, and there are other members of my family in the house. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, so this is a special meeting. We had some items that needed to be addressed, so we needed to call this meeting outside of our regular schedule. So the first item we need to talk about is the 2021 warrant article for the 60s wing reno project. As everyone may recall, what the board voted to do is have this as a standalone item on the warrant this year. So what we are trying to discuss tonight is how wording can work, because we do have some information that Mr. Dowd was able to give us. So we kind of need to rework this a bit and also figure out how we do funding, et cetera. So Jeff, I don't know if you want to talk to this. I know that you sent us, excuse me, I'm going to pull up my document from you that you talked about. So basically, I'm good to give like a quick rundown of what we're talking about here. And then Jeff, if you want to talk to some of the issues and some of the suggestions that you gave. So we have a cost estimate of roughly $2 million for the 60s wing project. As David and Megan presented last month, there's various aspects to this project, but it's all centered around renovating the 60s wing, which we know has been an issue for a long time. So with wording from the DRA, we have to make this make sense in a warrant article. And the appropriations needs to be identified. And Jeff, jump in if I'm saying any of this wrong, but I'm kind of taking it from the document you gave us. So we need to identify either in the warrant article itself or the budget, the appropriations or the funds that we're utilizing for this. So we have to do that so that it can be spent towards this project. So, Jeff, if you don't mind, I don't know if you want to now talk to some of the options that you laid out for us, and then the board can discuss what we should do here.
Yeah, Caitlin, I think that was well stated. I think that as a general proposition, we understand that we would like to utilize the funding that we have in hand for the capital reserve, and really make sure that we can identify the funding that we would need for the project to go forward, so that if someone were to come to me at a later point and say, hey, project has an estimate of 2.095 million, where's the rest of the funding for this? And what the Department of Revenue Administration is okay with is if we've appropriated the funds in the first place, and I'll explain this in a minute, if we've appropriated funds in the first place, we don't need to put it on the warrant article. So what this means is that if we have a project of, let's say, 2.095 million, and we have a budget of our facility for our facilities projects lines that's $200,000, well, $300,000, 200 of which we intended to use or pivot to this project if it should pass, we would then not have to put that 200,000 would be appropriated as part of our operating budget. We would not have to put we would not put that on the ballot. We would have a project that's essentially $2,095,000 with a ballot amount of $1,895,000, because we are already appropriating or redirecting $200,000 of funds that we're looking to appropriate as part of the operating budget over to this particular project. So I think just identifying the source of funding is one of the main objectives, because that will definitely allow me to turn to DRA and say, look, this is where the money is coming from. As part of that, I gave 3 or 4 different options. One of them is, does the board generally accept and I believe the bid amount, or sorry, the quote amount came in at $2,095,000. I believe that did include a contingency amount as well. Is the price of the project as it's, as it stands right now, where the board is on this project? And I have no reason that we wouldn't price it out at $2,095,000, but one option is to look at the price. What are we looking to pay for it? What do we think it's going to cost? Another way to be able to offset some of the cost with really, I don't say any additional, but nothing out of the ordinary. Well, for the last year, we had a capital reserve item on the ballot for $400,000, and that helped build our capital reserve fund. Capital reserve fund is being used to pay for a majority of this project. We typically do that. We have another warrant article out there for $100,000 to build up capital reserve. Would it make sense to simply request that amount from the voters and say, we'd like to have our project, be offset by that $400,000 that we would normally put to capital reserve, instead to be put toward this project to get it done as quickly as possible. Obviously, the project has some cost savings and economies of scale that we can get done in doing everything at once, and we can probably save a lot in the energy loss in that building, as well as have much better learning environments for our students. So another option would be to go to that capital reserve and just ask the voters to appropriate it, not out of next year's, and I'll say not out of next year's, not as an additional item for next year's budget, but just like you normally set up the warrant article for capital reserve. If there's first $150,000 of surplus goes to the voters, next this $400,000 would go then to this project, balance of surplus to the voters to offset taxes. So that's another source of funding. And the final source of I shouldn't say funding, but the final way to set this up, the final avenue I think on this, is for us to be able to consider and commit to what we would be looking to encumber from this year's budget to this project next year. And I think I laid out all 4 scenarios in one option. And by encumbering from this year's budget, what that means is that we would take funds from the current year budget and at the end of the year and make a commitment on those funds that they would be used to pay for some portion of this project. And if that amount is, and I just used a rough number of 190,000, and we encumber funds every year, by the way, that's not untypical. You know, we have, for example, if we have a project going on in the school that we can't do when students are in the building, which happens frequently, we can't get that project done from the day that the students are out of the building. We can't even get started sometimes from the day the students are out of the building. Sometimes it'll start in July or August. So we'll hold that money from the budget, reserve that money in the budget, so that it is used in the subsequent year to pay for that project in the subsequent year with the current year budget funding. So that encumbrance is another option, another way to do it. I do think that this creates and helps create transparency with the voters. I think that some of the assumptions that are being made, you know, on this are really in a position to be communicated well to the voters. I just don't want there to be any confusion as to where the funding is coming from, either from a voter perspective or from a Department of Revenue Administration perspective. I don't want someone coming in at a later point and saying, well, the project is over 2 million, you've got 116 in the warrant. Where's the rest of the funding coming from? And I did lay out a sample where, and I used, I think, all of the scenarios where I said, look, what it would look like if you took in the project cost of 2,095,000 and you accepted a project cost of, let's say, 1.9 million. I'm not saying, not recommending, just putting it out there for discussion purposes. So if the project cost is 1.9 million and you have a capital reserve contribution of the 1,116,000, which we would be expecting as part of the current warrant now, to have an additional capital reserve request of 400,000, as you normally would, which would be for the surplus over 150,000. To consider an encumbrance out of the current year's budget, perhaps 190,000, and to take a look at the facilities budget next year. I know that the facilities budget, we have 300,000 in our projects line, and we could certainly redirect 200,000 easily to this type of project. So in a situation like that, I don't say we're not creating any additional tax obligations, if you will, on the next year's burden to the town. It allows us to get the project underway, and that is the structure of funding. Now, it makes the warrant article substantially more complex, and I believe that we spoke about this at the prior meeting. I think that the complexity of it is due to the multiple sources of funding on it. I think the complexity of it is due to the fact that when we have a separate capital reserve, standalone capital reserve article, it's a separate standalone capital reserve article on its own. So, in this case, we'd be putting that article into this particular project, into this project request. So it does get complicated, it does get complex. So really, it's an issue now of identifying what the sources of funding are. I don't think that the intent here is to create any additional appropriations or burdens on the taxpayers. I just want to make sure that that is clear, that there are no problems with the Department of Revenue Administration, that there are no problems paying for the project when it comes up. There are no objections to it, nothing like that. So I really have a bunch of different avenues that would provide a tremendous amount of clarity to the Department of Revenue Administration, I guess to our taxpayers as well, as to the overall project cost. Bear in mind, and I listed this in the communication to the board. If let's just say if a project cost by the board was at 1.9 million, and I'm just saying if, in the scenario that we talked about initially, where we had 200,000 being coming out of next year's budget already appropriated, and we were going to take 200,000 out of 200,000 out of next year's facilities budget, 190,000 out of this year's budget. The question would be, what amount goes on the ballot? And if in that case, the project cost, or the cost on the ballot, would be 1,510,000. Any taxpayer, anyone on the board, anyone from the DRA can say, look, you have a project on the ballot for 1.5 million, 1.5 million, 10,000. Where is that money? Where's the rest of the money coming from? You have a project cost an estimate of 2,095,000. Well, in that case, I would say, look, the board is going with, yes, that's the estimate. If the board wanted to go with a lower number, that's the number that we're working on is $1,900,000. We're appropriating $200,000 already for next year's project, from next year's budget. Whether we do this project or not, we're going to direct those funds to this particular project in the amount of $200,000. And we're planning on encumbering $190,000 from the current year budget. And that's where we go from 1.5, and that's how we're getting to the current ballot amount, to the warrant amount, to the amount of the anticipated project cost. We don't need to list $2,095,000. We don't need to list the total project cost because we can only appropriate those funds once. We can't go in and appropriate them as part of next year's budget if we intend to use it, and then request that we get the full appropriation as well. We'd be over appropriated. Essentially, we'd have $2,095,000 if that's the amount that we were to put on the ballot, and we would be using $200,000 as well from next year's budget, facilities budget. So right on its face, we're just appropriating too much. That's not necessary. What would be helpful would be to have this laid out in such a way that the DRA and that other members of the public could definitely understand and see where the funding is coming from, how it's being funded, what the project cost expectations are. And right now, with 1.16, it definitely will be an issue, I believe, with the DRA when the question is asked, where's the rest of the funding? Well, I can tell them about $200,000 from next year's facilities budget, and I can tell them about money that would be encumbered from the current year's budget, but I don't think that enough can be encumbered from this year's budget that we'd be able to pay for, take a chunk out of that project in order to cover it. If we had other money that was going to become available in next year's budget for this purpose, that it would be helpful to know and be able to identify, look, we think that we're going to have some room here, we think we're going to have some room there. But if we thought that we weren't going to spend as much for whatever reason in oil or whatever, then the question would be, well, if you're not going to spend that much in the budget, if you're not going to spend that much next year, why would you have that much on that line of the budget? If you needed the facilities line, move it to the facilities line and then use it as an offset here. If we thought that we, could move 50,000 into the facilities line, then we would be able to move and use 250,000 to offset the project cost from next year's budget, which would mean we would not be appropriating it twice. But it's a fair question the DRA will have, and I've spoken with them, and the preference is to have it laid out, but to not request, to not list the full amount of the project if we are either appropriating it next year through, let's say, the facilities budget, and we're going to pivot that amount toward this project, or if we've already appropriated it and we're going to encumber it for next year. So I will put that out there. I have offered, basically, the four options that I provided do give some pathway as to how all of these elements interchange and fit together in that warrant article. So I don't know what the board's pleasure, what the preference is here. It would be good, I think, from a DRA perspective and necessary from a DRA perspective to have some clarification on funding. So I don't know if the board has any thoughts on or questions on the email that I sent out, or thoughts on funding, or how a warrant would be set up in order to be able to make it clear to the DRA and to the voters, where our funding is coming from, or how we intend to pay for the project.
Hey, Jeff, I have a question.
Sure.
I need to simplify this. Okay, the problem we're having, the reason we're discussing this, right, is because the amount that we put on the warrant that we are asking for needs to reconcile with the actual amount, the cost of the project that we're going to use that money for. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so in looking at each of these four options, which you laid out for us, and I went through all of them, I still come up with a delta under each option. Imagine how you move the numbers around. So my question is, I don't see how by using any of these, there's still going to be a shortfall. We are not going to come to that 2.095 cost estimate for the project by doing this, because no matter what we do, we're going to fall short. The only way I see us getting to this is through taxation. And in one of the ways, it's like we're going to be taxing the people twice, taxing voters twice. Now, if I'm wrong, you tell me I'm wrong, but tell me how you're going to identify that shortfall that can that spans anywhere where you play with numbers, anywhere from $200,000 up to almost $1 million. Because I can't see it.
Right.
And the only way to get clarity, if you're really going to do this, is you're going to have to go through the budget line by line. Because some of the things that were said, like, well, we can redirect money from the facilities, take 200,000 out, that leaves with facilities with only 100,000 for projects, not only for this year, but for next year and for 2 schools. So I don't
Right.
see that happening. One of the suggestions about the contingency, that's just not a good move. You don't move a contingency that your project manager said you should put in, because if you have a problem, you don't have any cushion. The other option was to lower the cost of the project. Instead of the 2 million, go down to 1.9 million. The problem with that is the board then has to take a second look at what are we losing by doing that? What's being cut out of the design plan? And is that something we want to do? So I don't see a way we reconcile these numbers. I mean, if you could tell me I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong, but I don't know how you're going to do this based on these options and based on what we have available. My other concern is if we go through and use the capital reserve fund, we don't have anything. Again, we don't have a cushion. We have other things in this district that might come up, and that's our, kind of emergency fund too, that we're not going to have. I mean, this is something that I thought about because 3 years ago, when we started this plan at the central school, the engineers at the time said that our septic tank is at the end of life. The septic tank could, I hope it doesn't, but the septic tank could go at any time. And that's like a $500,000 item. So without any cushion, I just don't see how we do this. I think it's taking money away that we need from facilities, from the capital reserve. Probably the only viable thing would be to adjust downward the cost of the project. And then that would mean taking another look at what we lose by doing that. Again, if I'm wrong, tell me. If I'm wrong, you need to tell me exactly where you can identify where this money's coming from. Not maybe, not next year, maybe if this happens or that happens. You can't do that. You can't buy something and not have the money for it. And the DRA has said that. The money has to be there. We have to be able to identify it. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for exactly where that money's going to come from.
Right. And again, the money that I would identify, and I know that it would leave, it's still leaving 100,000 in that facilities department budget. And realistically, with the budget that we have currently in facilities, if this project doesn't get done, if the 60s wing does not get addressed, then you're going to have to start, possibly addressing those issues in that building at some point sooner rather than later anyway. So not all the issues, but some of them. So that, that funding may be used for that purpose as well. It'd be okay to take that $200,000 as identified out of the budget, not the whole 300. The 200 will still allow the balance of that budget to be on hand in the event of that is needed for your typical emergency, and it would allow us to continue on with our typical maintenance and repair work that we do, repairing, replacing classroom environments, floors, ceilings, that sort of thing. So the 200,000 I think is very easy to identify. If we were to encumber money from the current year budget, that's it. We can identify that. The rest, capital reserve, I mean, that's going to be a matter for the board to consider if that's something that there's an appetite for, or if there's an appetite for a warrant that is as is involved in the wording as what would be potentially proposed.
Okay, I don't think it's as complicated as all that. It's just very simple. We have a project that has a price tag on it that was given to us, 2.095 million. We have to have a warrant article that raises 2.095 million so that they match. That's pretty easy. I mean, that's what we need to do. So we need to find out, where are we going to come up with that money? The issue isn't if we take 200 and facilities has 100,000 left, well, he can still operate on that. That's fine, but that 200,000 still doesn't get us to the 2.095 million where we need to be for the cost of the project.
And Karen, to that end, I think it's important to remember that at a project at 2.095 million, if we're using 200,000 from the facilities budget, we're already appropriating that through the operating budget, through the budget that's normally voted. So what would appear if we were to say, yep, we're using that 200,000, just looking at that in a discrete way, the amount on the warrant would then be 1 million for this item only would be 1,895,000, would be 200,000 less because we're already appropriating that somewhere else in the budget. We're already appropriating that in the facilities budget as well. So my point is that between the two sources, between the amount that's listed on the warrant and the amount that we've got already in the budget, those would need to equal the 2.95 million, the total project cost. We couldn't appropriate it twice, but we certainly would need to identify the total project cost, either in the warrant article or in the budget.
Okay, is Jeff Mackey on? Is he in on this meeting? Do we know?
Yeah. Yep. Just give me 1 second.
I'd like to hear from him concerning the facilities amount.
I'm here.
Hey, Jeff, Karen Yasanka here.
Hey,
I assume you've been listening to our conversations on the warrant article number 4 and
I have.
the possibility of reducing your budget, facilities budget, down to $100,000 for 2 years to cover 2 schools. Do you think that's doable? Yes or no?
I would lean towards no, because I mean, for 2 years, if it were to be 1, that's doable, you know, especially with the year I just had and the amount of work I've been able to get done. But knowing that we have to go for next year's budget as well, now you're really, you know, pumping the brakes on getting a bunch of stuff done.
Can I clarify, Karen, you just asked him $100,000 total for 2 years?
Right.
That's not what I was understanding. What I understood Jeff to say, and Jeff Dowd said, was he was talking about next year's budget, the one that will be voted on in March, I think. The facilities line right now has $300,000 in it. He's talking about allocating $200,000 of that towards the 60s wing renovation. So I'm confused at the $100,000 for 2 years. Aren't we talking about $100,000 for the year 2021 to 2022? I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, I don't know. I understood it the other way. Jeff Dowd?
Just 200,000 out of next year's budget.
So it's for 1 year, he would have to operate, the facilities would have to operate with $100,000 for 1 year.
Jeff, didn't you say you want to encumber 200,000 from this year's budget too?
Perhaps 190,000, just to keep it a little different between the 2 years. And the board, you know, certainly, if it were available in the facilities line, that'd be helpful. But if we had that money available anywhere in the budget, the school board certainly could make encumbrance for that purpose.
And can I I just need a estimate, the last 3 years, what's our surplus been at the end of the year?
It's been quite a bit. I don't have that off the top of my head. If you give me a minute, I can try and pull it up.
That's fine. I mean, generally, as this is going to be a very round number, but I believe we've been in the high 800,000 to 900,000, I think. If maybe not a little bit more. That's not to say I want to leave Jeff Mackey and the facilities line with no money. My point is that if we have a greater likelihood than not that we would be able to encumber the number that Jeff Dowd mentioned, so he just mentioned about 190,000 from this current year's budget that's in place. that's more likely than not that we would have those funds that could be allocated.
Galen, could I just add something?
Yeah,
What
sure.
I'm concerned about, and I've in another district dealt with this in terms of what's considered a one-time expense, and then what should be in the default the following year. So you can't spend the same money. Like if it's a one-time expense this year, it would not be in the default for next year. You see what I'm saying? Because your default budget is it's contractual obligations minus one-time expenses plus any new cost, right? So I think we need to be careful about money that we spend this year as a one-time expense. And then if the budget doesn't pass, you don't have access to that money for a project because it's a one-time expense. It would not be in the default. You can put it in a proposed budget, but you can't put it in the default budget. It's not legal.
Okay, I guess what are you talking about any sort of encumbrance from this current year's budget? Or are you talking about what we're saying is like 200,000 from next year's budget?
This is why it's messy when you try to do it over 2 years. You're working out of a
I
proposed
understand.
budget right now. Let's just say this is possible. The budget could fail, but the project could pass. You won't be able to take the money out of the budget because the money won't be in the budget because it won't be in the default budget.
But our default this year is pretty similar to our.
Well, you're rolling
Operate-
forward a default budget with a one-time expense that you're now making it a two-time expense because he's talking about it's 190 this year. It's 200. It's the same money out of the same line spent on the same project. He's talking money out of this year and money out of next year. Next year's default budget is based on this
Right.
year's budget. It's a one-time expense that's now a two-time expense. It would not be in the default budget, not in a legal default budget. You got to be careful. I mean, you can't have a one-time expense be a two-time expense. That's why they call it a one-time expense, right?
I understand that part of it. I'm just trying to get us to what we can do and what we can't do. I guess where my confusion comes is if we already have a default budget and a proposed budget, those numbers are already in there. So again, this is going way beyond like my minimal understanding level of this stuff. But what I keep coming back to is we move money between lines fairly frequently. So I understand that because this is a warrant article, we need to be clear about where the funds would come from.
You don't
I don't
want
know,
to.
maybe I'm getting a little twisted up here.
Yeah, that's what I mean. When you complicate an article over 2 years with one-time expenses and potentially being in a default budget, it creates an inability to actually execute the will of the voters if they voted for a project that you don't have access to the money. You know, I said from day one, I said by the public hearing, we need to identify where the money's coming from, right? But now we have
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why this meeting was important. But what I'm suggesting is we've now identified a one-time expense in the 2021 school year that would not roll into a default budget that you already voted into 21-22. And you're actually counting on that money as part of an article on the ballot. It's just not clean. It's very messy.
Yeah, and also I just want to bring up again, because I think it's a real concern that if we use the capital reserve and we use the money from the facilities and then something goes wrong, we don't have another pocket to go to. We don't have money to fix it if it's a big ticket item.
I guess my confusion with that point though, Karen, is that we've for several years talked about putting money into capital reserve in order to be able to hopefully do a project. So to then turn around and say, well, we need to save it for emergencies, while I don't disagree that it is better to have a buffer for emergencies, it's kind of like going back on what this board over the last 2 years has been trying to do. Regardless of the amount that we have put in, I mean, the discussions at most of the meetings about putting a capital reserve warrant article up have been to build up funds for projects. Again, I don't disagree with not having a buffer, but I don't know. I have a little bit of a problem with saying that we shouldn't use it when we've been working towards this,
Well,
at least.
I think the key, what you said, is that we agreed to put it in there for projects. It wasn't until maybe last year that that project turned into the 60s wing. The capital reserve was always
Well,
there for projects that might come up, but it was never.
right, but we're reaching critical mass in the 60s wing. I mean, as Jeff Dowd also pointed out, we are likely getting into a point where some of those facility dollars are going to have to go into fixing things into the 60s wing. So whether we're allocating or whether we're figuring out using those funds in a direct way towards the renovation, or if they're roundabout ending up in the 60s wing because we have mechanicals that fail or straight out window seals that start failing, I don't even know. I don't know.
Well, you could, just go back to the initial problem, why we're here. We have to make the amount on the warrant article reconcile with the amount of the actual cost of the project. And we've had discussions back and forth. I'm still not getting a clear answer. I don't know where the money is going to come from. And I personally don't think you're going to find it unless you do a line by line item of the budget. That's all. I mean, I'm not going to go to the mat for this. I mean, I just think that I want to do it right. I want the warrant article to be honest. I want people to see where the money's coming from. That's my concern. I mean, if you can make it work, if we can make it work, fine. But I'm just saying, I still haven't heard a number of where that money's going to be identified from, clearly. It's kind of like, we'll take some from here and some from here and maybe some from next year. But we have to have a clear, we have to have an amount, that's all. That's all I'm saying.
Jeff, we can't spend all night on this, so let's start at the top. Can we say, if everybody can respond, can we agree that, just for argument's sake, we're not going to change the project cost right now, and it is 0.95 million? Whatever 1.9 that you mentioned, for that to happen would, you got to go back to construction and everything else. But just so we could have a starting point to get to what the zero balance is or the delta is, if we could start at 2.095 million. Does that, everybody agree with that? That's what it is. That's what it is.
Yes, that's what it is.
Okay, so one, Jeff just said, but I think over 2 years. So, but let's ask Jeff again, Jeff Mackey, could we take 200,000 from you next year? I don't even want to ask him about the 190 this year because even in the email, it says not likely. So so what do we throw that 190 right out? And that's our delta so far? Well, the delta is 190,000 with the difference between 1.9 million and 2.095. That's what I see the real delta is here. If Jeff is okay with taking 200,000 from next year's budget, I see the delta as being the 190,000 encumbered from this year's budget, plus the difference of that, comfortable number that we were talking about, 1.9 million versus 2.095. Is that accurate, Jeff? Jeff Dowd? That the 190 is not really feasible, or it can't be put in.
But that's not what Jeff wrote in the email. He said 190 encumbrance from current year budget, and then in parentheses he said it would be nice but not necessary if this was available from the facilities line, which is not necessarily likely. Then he says, since it's already appropriated, no need to include as an appropriation on the warrant. My understanding of that is that it may not be likely that there is 190,000 in the facilities line, but that it's likely available in other lines. Jeff, Dowd, I don't want to misrepresent that if that's not what you meant. But
I
that
think
was
that-
my understanding of that.
I think that's a good reading of what was there. Yeah.
Okay, so going back to what you said, Caitlin, that we normally have a surplus, but we can't tell the voters, yeah, we're probably gonna have a surplus and we're gonna use that, but we don't know what it is. But it's always generally, and I'm not, saying you said this exactly, I'm just saying in general, we can't tell the voters that, over a 10-year average, we'd have an average surplus of $550,000. We got this. I understand that we can do that personally in our own finances, make decisions like that. But I don't think that right now, we have to identify where that 190 is coming from. And we'd have to take the project back up from 1.9 million to 2.095. So that's a solid delta right now. The $195,000, right, Jeff? Because
Is that the 190?
195. The 1.9 million that was at the top of your worksheet
Mhm.
should really be 2.095 million.
That's the full project price. That's the full project cost. Yeah. The scenario that I gave to you included, incorporated all of the options to see how they intertwined and played out.
Right. So we really should start at the top of the equation with 2.095. So if that changes and we can actually say exactly where the 190 comes from, then I think you're there. I understand what Karen's talking about, using every cent from the capital reserve, but,
So if it's helpful, Caitlin, I know that you had asked the question on unassigned fund balance. So I'm gonna cover a few numbers here. 1920 unassigned fund balance was 1,321,000. We had the unassigned fund balance retained, the money that the district holds for those emergencies, of 577,000. We had essentially encumbrances for different vendor payments and obligations of 73,000. So that year also, we had reserved the $400,000 that was voted for the capital reserve contribution. So that was a pretty good year, I'd say, in terms of what we were able to return to the town. In 1819, it was 712,000. We had retained 450,000 that year for our emergency fund. We had set up 125,000 as a reserve for our capital reserve contribution, which was voted at the polls, and encumbrances of 33,000. And in 1718, we're looking at 673,000 unassigned fund balance, with 300,000 in our fund balance retained. That's the emergency fund. 125,000 again, capital reserve contribution. And so that was reserved. That was out of that fund balance. That was before the unassigned fund balance, the bottom line balance, and 48,000 in encumbrances. So that gives an idea. And in this past year, with the 577,000, that was, I think, the maximum fund balance retained that we could put into that emergency fund, which was understandable based on the environment that we're in right now. So those are some of the fund balances for the past 3 years, ranging from 673 to 1,300,000, with increasing amounts being held for our emergency fund and increasing amounts going to capital reserve, and varying amounts of existing encumbrances. We have encumbrances every year.
Thank you for getting those numbers, Jeff. I appreciate it. Okay, so another question I have for anyone who can answer this. say we get this to a point that we can figure out the funds. Hold on. Somebody else talk if you have any questions. I got to form this in my head the way I'm thinking it. If anybody else has questions, otherwise we'll just sit and wait for my brain to catch up.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from either Dave Smith or Megan, who were on the committee and worked on this and the numbers. And I'd like to hear where they obviously must have thought that the money was there. So I'd like to hear where it was coming from, because I think that's the piece that's missing.
Well, Karen, I think that Jeff laid it out in his email where it's coming from. I understand that there's members of this board who do not want to, go about it that way. For me, I look back at the last 6 years that we've been talking about the 60s wing, and it's finally within our grasp. And we're going to have to make this work by looking at this year's funds and then saying, how can we do this with next year's? And it's right there in front of us. I don't see it as a difficult number. I see it as exactly what Jeff has laid out, period. It's, to me, I think we're overcomplicating it. I think it's very simple. So that's.
So what part of that Jeff laid out is the part we're going to use to fund this then?
Well, there's concern about using the capital reserve, depleting it to zero. I think that for me, that's not a concern. That's
okay.
That's a big piece right there.
So, okay.
Asking for the 350,000 for an additional from the capital reserve from this year's budget, I think that's doable. If it's a matter of somebody doesn't like the wording of 190,000 of the encumbrance from the current year, well, you increase the capital reserve request from 350 to 550 then. If that's what the wording here, some people have consternation about it, then we do that way. Either way, the numbers are there and the numbers speak for themselves that we've had it in the past. Now it's within reach. Again, last year we voted for that 400,000. Four out of five members voted on that 400,000 for capital reserve with the plan to do it this way this year. So I see that we're following the plan that we've put in place.
So, wait, oh, sorry, Jim. Jim, you're on mute.
Jeff, we need to get to the next thing we're going to talk about eventually. So let's start at the top. David, I heard what you said, okay? And I'm going to incorporate what some of you said, what you said into what I'm going to ask Jeff. Jeff and Dave, you can answer this too. It's not 1.9 million, it's 2.095. So if everything holds true on the sheet that you already gave us, then our delta right now is 195,000, correct?
Correct.
All right, so we got 195. Let's assume that the 190 won't come from facilities. Are we able to give $200,000 from next year's facilities budget to this, Jeff Mackey?
I mean, like I stated before, I'm able to make it through one time. I can't afford to get hammered down the line. If anything does happen, I want to make sure I have this money in my budget and those lines the following year as a definite, because I've been able to get a ton of stuff done this year, more than I've been able to get, more than most people with all the time off. But it comes down to, if I have to push 1 year, I can handle that. But anything after that, I mean, it's dangerous because, like Mrs. Yasenko brought up, if something big does go, where are we getting the money for it?
So if Jeff Dowd does not encumber $190,000 from you this year, you could give up $200,000 next year.
If that's, if you guys are really pushing for it, I mean, I'm here to support you. And 1 year though, that's all I can really, give up. So.
Okay. I'll
Right.
take that as a hesitant yes. All right, thank you. So we still have a delta of 195,000. Then we go to the 350. All right. Some may not like it or some may like it. We'll keep there. We still have a delta of 195. Let's skip down to the 1.16. We got that. Okay. So Dave mentioned taking the 190 and the 350 and doing 540 for the surplus. Jeff, is that even doable? Jeff Dow?
Well, I mean, the voters went for 400,000 last year, didn't they? For just to build up our fund.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay, all right, so that's an option. I guess my next question is, when you say the 190 encumbered from this year's budget isn't likely from facilities, without having to do the 540 for the capital reserve, do you have to legally, and can you tell us exactly what lines the 190 will come out of? Or would you rather go the route of doing the 540 that David said?
I would have to take a look at our lines now on the 190 in the event that facilities did not have that in their budget. It is a bit of an interesting year, Jim, where we have a lot of moving factors that are impacting our lines favorably and mostly favorably, with funding coming in. So I'd want to take a bit of time to review and make sure that we have the lines that we could take that 190 from with certainty.
So
before committing, but I can take a look while we're on the call.
So, but legally, I don't know if that's the right term. Do you have to say exactly what lines the 190 are coming from?
Not at this time, no.
What do you mean, at any time?
Well, when we'd go to encumbered at the end of the year, then we would say, yeah, this is where it's available in the budget to be encumbered.
So, but you could do kind of what Caitlin was saying. We always have a surplus and just put 190 on there and hope it's there, or is that not the way to go?
Well, if we do generally have a surplus, and what lines it would be coming from would be the question. So if we had, when we get to that point, the board could take a look and say, yep, this is where this is the money we've identified, the lines we've identified it to come from. And we're just talking about the 190 that I had already contemplated in that email, right?
Right.
In the communication.
So let me say it again, just because I want to make sure I understand it. So we generally have a surplus. Eventually, you'll have to identify the 190.
Mhm.
But do we now, and to the voters, to get this on the warrant, do we have to identify where the 190 is coming from?
Not right. No, I don't think
You
we have
mean
to.
where the 190 is, what line the 190 is coming from, correct? Because
Right.
we are saying it's coming from this year's, it would be encumbered from this current year's budget, right? So you're saying, Jim, do we need to identify the line
Yeah.
from the budget that it's coming from? Okay. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I don't know that it's necessary even at that time. I think that it would be a fair response to, hey, look, it looks like we're running okay in this line and that line. At the end of the year, we'd be comfortable to say those are the lines that we feel we're going to be able to pull it from if it's not available in facilities itself.
So what you're really saying is, from this worksheet, that we need to find an additional $195,000 from the first line that you have there, where you wrote 1.9, but it's really 2.095. So one
That
of
would-
these items needs to go up $195,000. Either you take more out of this year's budget, next year's budget, or that 350 capital reserve goes up 195 because where you started at, we're not changing, right?
The 2095 would not change. That's different than the 1.9 that I have in that laid out.
Right. So,
yeah.
so if you're saying that we don't have to identify the line right now, and you can put 190 in there, just need to be confident, I guess you can get it, that we need to find $195,000 somewhere. Either reduce the price of the project, which I don't think we're gonna do, or get it from some other line, get it from taxation or capital reserve or whatever. Right?
Correct.
All right. Well, where do you want to get the 195 from?
Are you
think it's
asking the board or Jeff?
Well, that's the delta right now. If, right, I mean, I was really concerned about the 190, but what I'm hearing now is we don't really have to tell the voters. We can say we generally have a surplus. We're probably going to have a surplus. I don't like generally and probablys and not likelys, but if he's saying he can do it, then I'm not going to say no, you know, but the project cost is not 1.9 million. So the 195 is the delta that Karen's been talking. Well, I don't know if that's the number she talked about, but that's the number I arrived at. And I think Jeff's in agreement. Right? Am I wrong?
On the 195? Yeah, if the price goes up, then the 195. If you made an adjustment on your capital reserve request, that would be one way to address it. You could ask for it as well, which is something that I didn't include in the email. Really, I think it's an option that's out there. Certainly, it's one that I know. Speaking with Dean Eggert, it's one that he's in favor of, just in case there's a shortfall anywhere, just to include at the end of it, their balance to be appropriated through taxation. It's always an option. Not one that I really put in the email, because I think the idea here is that we're trying to find a way to pay for the project without looking to have that additional taxation put out there. However, that definitely is an option. That's really not, I don't think that the option that the board, you know, that's the option that's there. That's the reasonable option. I don't know that that's an option that's a path of first choice here for the school board. It's there.
I'm just waiting to see if anybody else has anything to say. I don't want to cut anyone off.
The only thing that I would say though at this point is just to confirm where we would be at on this. It's a project cost of 2095, 200,000 as a redirection from the budget next year, which we'd planned on. We would have, and I think the variable here is 350. Is that going to be 350? Is that going to be 400? Is that going to be some other amount? And the 1116 from capital reserve, that seems to be a given. We know that one's there. So I guess what's the capital reserve amount going to be? Is that 350?
You're
Is
saying,
that
are we
550?
taking the retention of the unencumbered fund balance or unassigned fund balance? I'm trying to make sure I'm getting the.
No, I proposed a capital reserve contribution of 350
Right.
as an option.
Right, that's what I meant, sorry.
Yeah,
Does that stay at 350 or does that move to a different number to make up some of that 195,000?
I guess, Jeff, you know, where I work, we do a lot of forecasting of budget versus actuals. So right now on a 12-month budget in actuals, you'd be at what, about an 8+4? So 8 months of actuals, 4 months of forecast.
About 6 and 6, I'd say at this point.
Oh, that's right. I'm thinking it's February. Sorry, trying to fast forward a bit. where are you at right now with your 6+6? With unused budget?
Just double check here. That's a whole other analysis that I normally do.
Mhm.
It's not only the budget, it's the revenue as well. It's both
Mhm.
factors.
Yep.
So really have to measure where we're at. And I'd really have to sit down. As a general proposition, we're not really out of line with where our budget is. We're favorable on the budget.
Right.
I'll say that. I'd have to take a better look as to exactly what that position is. We have a number of factors that go into it. Don't forget, we have a budget revenue and we have a budget expense.
Yep.
And it's not one, it's both. So how's our budget for expenses? We can be doing well with our expense budget. We can be coming up short on revenue, which puts us level for the year. So I definitely would want to take a little bit deeper of a look than what we have now for time. But we are favorable generally.
Right. So I would suggest then, if this is the, where this helps to settle it, to your point, Jim, about finding the money, raise the capital reserve request to an even 500,000. That gets us 150. And that's, I'd say, close enough to the pin here. And if we need to say encumbrance is a little bit more than the 190, or we look to say what is next year's budget and we find another $45,000 or $50,000, but that gets us to what we need.
I'm good with that. I feel like it's a little more straightforward.
Right. So I'll look at the numbers from your email, Jeff, but I'll raise it from the 1.9 to the 2.095. So we start with 2.095. There's redirection from facilities of 200,000, capital reserve of 500,000, encumbrance of 190,000, deplete the capital reserve of 1.16, brings us to what we need.
It's 45 short.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit the difference.
All right. And we challenge and we ask Dr. Metzler and Mr. Dowd to find $45,000 out of our $30 million budget next year, to put a line in there for supporting the contingency of the 60s wing.
Would we be transferring that money? Would that be a recommended budget transfer before the public hearing? Or would that be something that we would be looking at and saying, this is something that if this happened, we would be not needing to spend that money?
I mean, in my mind, that's part of the contingency there, that we've got 150 to 200. I forget what the exact amount is, Jeff, on this 2.095 million. I think it's 150 or 180 if you have that up right now. But that's contingency just in case. And I think that if it comes to that just in case, in my mind, we have a $30 million budget. We should be able to find that $45,000 next year. But if the board here wants to actually allocate that and find the line before the information session, then we can do that too.
And yeah, the contingency is 125,000.
All right, thank you for that.
So essentially, if the delta is 45, the question would be, does the project cost come down by 45 to bridge the gap, right? And that would be removing some of that contingency. Is that one of the options, or are we looking to make some adjustments to the budget really at the, just before the public hearing?
Well, I think to kind of split the difference, I mean, what if we did reduce the project cost 45,000? Do we feel like that? This is probably more directed at David and Megan, just because you guys have been working with the construction team. If we reduce the cost 45,000, does that just reduce the contingency, or do you think that would mean they would require changes to what that project is looking like?
It would be changes to the contingency from a 125 to 80,000.
Okay, so what are people's thoughts on that? And again, maybe first to David and Megan. I mean, this is obviously it's a board project, but you have been the ones entrenched in it, so.
So if you would like, I would take the action to discuss with Gino, to talk about reducing the contingency and see his comfortableness with that. And if he is not comfortable with that, then I would suggest we provide direction again to Dr. Metzler and Mr. Dowd to find the $45,000 out of next year's budget.
Okay, what is board members, what do we? Did I just talk over someone? Sorry.
No, on that point, Caitlin, I would prefer, having worked with Gino, he didn't just throw that number out there arbitrarily.
Mhm.
I would be reluctant to reduce the contingency amount and would be in favor of having Jeff Dowd and Dr. Metzler work on finding it within the budget. Going down the lines in the budget. Just my opinion.
Okay, okay. Anybody else?
I think it's worth having.
I mean, I'm,
with Gino.
okay.
So just to confirm the numbers again, just so we're all on the same page, we're either at a project cost of 2095, right, or 2,050,000. So I guess the question would be, leaving the meeting tonight, putting together the warrant, what would the number be for the warrant?
Right, so that's what I was hoping to get us to tonight, but I don't know if we're gonna get there. Because we have public hearing next week.
And to confirm the rest, Caitlin, we're at 1116 out of capital reserve. Additional capital reserve 550. Anticipated
I
encumbrance
think it was
109.
500.
500 even.
I believe that's what David mentioned.
That's, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to come up with that 195 that we were talking about. And if everybody's comfortable with raising the capital reserve request to 500, then that covers most of the need.
Okay. And if we do an encumbrance, as we've been talking about, at 190, and a facilities budget next year of 200, we're actually $89,000 short if the project is at 2,095,000. Correct me if my math is wrong.
So Jeff, I might be wrong, but I have 2.05 is what we just came up with if I go down the line, or I'll start from the bottom, 1.16 million.
Yep.
Plus 190,000.
Hmm.
Plus 500,000.
Hmm.
Plus 200,000.
Hmm.
Gives me 2.05 million.
Yep. And on an amount of 2095,
So, yep.
that would be 89,000 short.
45 short.
Sorry. If our price is 2,095,000 and we've come up with 2 million, essentially 2,006,000.
No, 2,050,000.
Oh, I'm showing the 1116, 500, 190, 200. I'm going with 2,006,000. Megan, I see you typing something in over there.
Yeah, I'm getting 45,000. I've done it a couple times.
Okay,
Yeah, I just did the same thing.
okay.
I'm doing it again, just, yeah, I'm getting 205.
Oh, okay. Yep, okay, I'm there. Yep, I'm there.
So knowing that we have the public hearing next week, in less than a week, we kind of need to figure this out. So we have this $45,000 question mark. So we can either have David and Megan ask Gino about reducing somewhere, contingency, etc. Or we ask Dr. Metzler and Mr. Dowd to find it in next year's budget without changing the budget, but finding it on line items.
So the good news is that if we were to find some money in the budget, reallocate it, I don't know when exactly that would happen on the part of the board, but the good news is that that wouldn't change the bottom line budget for the public hearing, so that's good.
Right.
The bad news
Right.
is that it would be a little tricky to set that up. We'd have to be very careful about what we're setting up for slides before the budget, and we probably want to have the school board adopt any changes that were in the budget.
So if I can ask then, if the board gives me the next 15 hours, 16 hours, I'll have a discussion with Gino first thing in the morning. And based on that discussion, if he agrees to this and he's good with it, and we have a thoughtful discussion about, not just taking it out for the sake of taking it out, but how does he trust it or not? We've had discussions on the addition where we went through some numbers and, we talked about where it would and what the risks are. So I think if we had a good discussion tomorrow morning about this, I'd be able to give back to the board and to Dr. Metzler and Jeff and Mr. Dowd what that answer is. If he's not comfortable with it, and I'm not going to sit there and hound him to do this, I am looking at him as being a true, leader and good person on this and advocate with lots of experience. If he says no, give the direction to Dr. Metzler and Mr. Dowd to find the $45,000 of a $30 million budget by, I don't know how long you would need, Mr. Dowd and Dr. Metzler.
The things that can typically do relatively quickly, you just have to make decisions. It's just whether the sacrifice is something that the board needs to consider or not, or if there is no real sacrifice. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And we can make these decisions when empowered to. It's just a matter of what does it mean. Now, to your point, you're looking for X amount of dollars in a $30 million budget. We're not talking about a major sacrifice here, but I don't know where Jeff is in terms of, you talked about where we are 6 months in and what we think will be available. I know we have a lot of unexpected expenses. So, I'm hearing from Mr. Flynn about a lot of things that we're paying for that we weren't anticipating. So can we find $45,000? Of course we can. What does it mean? I would think we could do that pretty quickly. I mean, we need to do it by the public hearing anyway.
Right.
I mean, we have to have it Tuesday. You remember, Dave, we talked about that. I mean, I was very clear. I said, we pick a strategy, but by the public hearing, we need to be very clear.
Right.
What I'm really worried about, and I've shared this on several occasions. I'm worried about something that is requiring 2 yeses for us to be able to do next year. Meaning, project passes, but budget doesn't pass. Are our hands tied in a way with? And I mentioned it earlier. One-time expenses. That's what makes me not as comfortable. I like the 1 yes. Like, here's the whole thing. It's all spelled out. If the voters say yes, we're good to go. It worries me if it requires 2 yeses somehow, some way. You know what I mean? Do you follow what I'm saying in terms of a yes and a no?
Right.
Now, what's the likelihood that the voters would say, sure, fix the 60s wing, but we're not giving you the budget? That's not likely. It's
Right.
possible, but not likely.
Right.
You know, I'm aware of that too. So I don't want to be, you know, the sky is falling either. I just want to be clear. I just hate to set us up in a way that we get some sort of no means no in here that we weren't anticipating. So that's my only concern. But to your original point, I don't mean to go on. To find $45,000, I think Jeff and I could do that pretty quickly. I mean, we have to do it by Tuesday, so that would be tomorrow's work, really, or later tonight. You know.
Well, I'll share the sentiment with Dr. Metzler that it would be, obviously the ideal situation is one year that we could say a definite yep, and this is the way it's going to go, and it's certain and definite. But on that note, depending on where this goes, the question would be, and it seems like we have some direction. If it doesn't seem like it's viable to reduce the contingency, then we don't. We find the money in the budget, but we'd have to have some sort of meeting before the public hearing in order to make sure that budget is reflected appropriately, and that the warrant article is set up appropriately as well. So right now, I would anticipate that we would be weaving together you'd be weaving together some sort of motion, incorporating some of the figures that we're looking at right now as part of that warrant article. But we know that warrant article is going to change before public hearings. Either A, the amount is going to go down because the contingency is removed, or the funding will be a little bit different, and it would be $45,000. Let's just say $45,000 from next year's to be appropriated from next year's budget. So I'm not sure when we would be able to finalize that, because those are a couple moving pieces that make it difficult to get the public hearing materials together in one form. We need to have certainty as to what that's going to be. And if we plan that it is going to be one or the other, and it looks like it's going to not be a $45,000 reduction that's going to come out of next year's budget, at least it's clear and we can plan accordingly. But there is some risk there that until the board is final on its vote, planning and putting these things together is a bit dodgy, a bit dicey. So I don't know if you'd be planning to meet again before the public hearing, or if you'd be meeting before the public hearing, and we could be directed to put together the public hearing materials based on the outcome of tomorrow's discussion.
So sounds like we have to meet between now and the public hearing to finalize. So we have all of the people here who would need to decide that. So taking, say, tomorrow out of the equation, we really are only left with, well, I suppose it could be. Melissa, how long do we have to notice a special meeting? 24 hours?
It's 24 hours, but you always have the option of calling an emergency meeting, just as long as at the beginning of the meeting,
Right.
you state the reason for that.
Okay. So basically, let's say we have either Thursday, Friday, or Monday, unless we met right before the public meeting, which I would really prefer not to do, because I don't think that's fair for those people who, Melissa and Jeff and everybody who are putting together those materials. So frankly, my preference, in order to give people time, would probably be Friday.
Fine.
Would be a pretty quick meeting, but I'm thinking Friday, if people are okay with that.
Yep.
Works for me.
Friday will be tough
Okay.
for me, Caitlin. I'll see what I can do. You're talking Friday night? Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, also, what I would be sticking to is we are literally coming to finalize this article, this warrant article. So if you were not able to attend, Dr. Metzler, I think it's okay. I'm not gonna, not that you're not integral, but I think on this one, if you were not able to attend, I think would be okay.
Thank you.
But if there's a better time, I mean, what's a good time for everybody? Do we want to stick with 7, or do we want to do it earlier and get it over with?
Earlier, please, if possible.
Okay, so about 6.
I'm good whenever you guys, whenever, earlier, later, whatever.
Whatever time.
Yep, that's fine. Whatever time works.
Do we go?
Okay. Jeff may want to have you there just for wording purposes.
Yep, I think I'm fine, yeah,
Okay.
for that time.
Okay. Melissa, if you don't mind posting that tomorrow. So 6 o'clock on Friday, the 8th. Mike, if you don't mind getting a link set up for that.
I can set up the link. 6 might be hard, so Jeff, would you mind launching it for me?
No.
Okay, thanks.
So, Caitlin, if it sounds okay, based on what may come out of the discussion tomorrow with Gino, and based on where the numbers may be moving around, based on the structure that, as I see it right now, I can send out perhaps some proposed language for the board to review with what will actually be the number on the warrant. The number on the warrant will neither be 2095 nor 2050 because we're already appropriating some of the funds, so we won't be doing again.
Right.
But if I can do that, I'm hoping that would be helpful for the board to be able to see what it looks like and maybe be able to put forward a vote relatively quickly.
Yep, that would be great. I know you put that on the other information you sent us, Jeff, so anything like that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we have all of our, David, you've got your marching orders to get in touch with Gino.
Got it.
Figure out moving contingencies. So for this item, we'll have a quick special meeting on Friday evening to finalize it ahead of the public hearing on Tuesday. Okay. I think that's it for the. Thank you. All right, so that item is done. The other item we needed to discuss is deliberative for February. I want to do a quick run through here because I know most board members, like I've been sending you emails and stuff, but I know we probably have at least a few people from the public watching, and this is much different than what we've ever tried to be figuring out any other year for deliberative. So I'm going to give a quick overview of what we're looking at. So obviously we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Obviously we're still in high levels right now. Normally a deliberative session is held in person. All of the ballot items are presented. Members of the public can speak, can potentially change items, certain items on the ballot and put that to a vote right at deliberative. With our current situation, putting a bunch of people into the cafeteria really doesn't seem like, frankly to me, a safe choice. That being said, the alternative given to us so far by the state, because we do have dates prescribed by the state of when we're normally supposed to do all of this. So the alternative that the state has passed is to offer a remote option, which I need to pull up my notes for this because it does get a little weird. So I apologize. I just need a second here. All right, there it is. I've got too much stuff open. Okay, so this option from the state would look something like this for a deliberative. An initial meeting would be held, which would essentially be an information session. It's not the public hearing, but it is essentially similar to the public hearing in that the board presents all of the items that are going to be on the ballot. Then, and prior to that happening, there is a requirement to notice all registered voters in town through a mailer at least 7 days prior to the meeting that this is how it's going to be held. So this information session is held. The board then gives the public a week to come back with any feedback, questions, comments, changes they would like to see. And we open up email, potentially the state mentions voicemail or text message. I'm not sure who that would go to, but we have ways for the public to give their feedback that they would normally give in person at deliberative. The board then holds a secondary meeting within 7 days of the first information session. The board answers questions that have come in by email or other means and addresses comments for the public. And then the school board discusses, debates, and potentially amends any of the posted warrant items. So rather than people coming in person to do that, the board takes that feedback and then makes that decision. Then, obviously, the warrant is made available electronically and I believe by paper as a sample ballot. So this is generally available anyways through the town, but this is something that we would then have to make sure everybody can get so they can look at it. Then the final change of this, which I really think makes it difficult, is the first warrant article on the ballot of voting day now has to ask whether voters approve of the optional meeting procedures that were put in place this year. If that ballot item doesn't get approved by a simple majority, all other warrant articles on the ballot that year are deemed disapproved, regardless of how people voted. So for instance, with the 60s wing item that we just talked about, if that was on the warrant, but the first, and it passed, but the first item on the warrant asking about approval of these optional meeting procedures, if that failed, then as an example, the 60s wing would fail regardless of how people voted. Additionally, election of officers does go through, even if warrant article 1 about the procedures does not, but everything else, including the budget, is automatically disapproved. Then what happens is the governing body, being the school board, has to vote whether to convene an additional meeting before September 1st for them to adopt an operating budget, or the board can deem the meeting as having adopted the previous year's operating budget, not including any separate warrant articles. So that's a lot. So that's the current alternative option the state has given us. A third piece of this is that there is a piece of legislation at the State House which has not yet been voted on, so we don't know how this is then going to impact it. There is a piece of legislation that is proposing allowing districts or towns to move both their deliberative sessions and their voting days, moving them out. I believe it's into April, May, or June. I don't have the wording in front of me, but it's like it would have to be a date either April, May, or June. So then everything gets held, nothing happens until that revised voting. One thing I'm not sure of is whether a school district and a town both have to agree to do that, or if it can be split. Now, we're two separate entities. Again, because this legislation hasn't passed, I'm not entirely sure on all the details. So that's where we are. We needed to talk about this in a meeting. I'm not anticipating that we will make a decision today, mostly because there is still information out there that we don't have, whether this legislation passes, how it can be split between a town versus a school district, et cetera. So I did want to just give a chance for board members to kind of talk about where they are at this point, what their feelings are on the direction we should go here. We are the governing body, and per our district council, we are the ones who make the final decision on how to do the deliberative session this year. So I just want to hear what other board members think about these options. Not holding anybody to anything right now. You say one thing now and change it later, it's fine. Just this is kind of a, I don't know, talk it out session, I guess.
All I can say is I won't be there. And I know I would like to be a part of it, and I'm assuming there's many in the public that won't be there, but would like to be a part of it. And that's any part of it. So whether they could change a warrant article or speak or listen or get documents. That needs to be thought of, that all that happens if it is in person, that everybody can participate the same as usual. We're up to, where was it? 3,600 people died the other day in the United States. We'll probably be up to 360,000 people tomorrow. I personally don't think we should have anything in person. I understand the hurdles that we're gonna have to jump through and the risk. But I mean, like you said, we might not be making decisions tonight, but I'm just giving you my opinion. I will not be there, and I don't think we should be in person, but that's me. Thank you.
No, I definitely appreciate that, Jim. That's the whole purpose here, is for everybody to talk this out.
Yeah, Caitlin, I won't go in person either. I already shared that with you. I also shared it with our town school district moderator, Neil Reardon, and also told him and told you, I don't expect any special accommodations for that. I just won't be there. And in talking to our town, or I should say school district moderator, he's town moderator also, just a few things that I pointed out. What Jim said, and that's all true. But he said, the elections that we had before went fine. People came in and they voted and they were in and out, and there was nothing that we're aware of that anybody contracted anything. But this is really different. This is not in and out. This is going to be a room full of people, administrators, staff,
Yep.
board members, construction team, cable personnel, supervisors of the checklists, any members of the public that come. And you're going to be there for maybe 2 hours, sitting with a mask on and inside. So I think it's different than just going in to vote and coming out. And then if someone does want to do a secret ballot, that's another process. Getting the piece of papers, getting the pens, writing them, standing in line 6 feet apart before you go in to put it into the ballot box. I know that remote is going to be difficult, but I don't really think in person is going to be a piece of cake either, if you do it right and keep all the precautions in place. And then the other thing, it's in the school. That's going to be on the 2nd. On the 3rd, you're going to have to get a cleanup crew in there that night, because you're going to have teachers and staff and kids in the building the next day in the gymnasium or the cafeteria. So anyway, that's just some issues I wanted to bring up so people are aware of it. Thanks.
All good points.
So I'm on the same page as Jim and Karen. I don't feel comfortable with the idea of being in person, but to Jim's point, I think it's very important to make sure everyone has equal opportunity. It's kind of like what Mr. Flynn and Dr. Metzler have been saying about, our hybrid and our remote kids, making sure everyone has the same access and the same ability to share their voice and go about the processes.
Yep. You're right.
So Caitlin,
David, I don't know if you.
Yeah, just if we were to have this in person, if that's the way we go, I would suggest that there's discussion about, instead of using the cafeteria, to use the gymnasium instead, which is larger and can hold people more to that 6-foot spacing. And that separates it from the rest of the school. So when we talk about the next day we have school, cleaning crews, etc., agreed with Karen, that keeps people separated per se, and only in the gymnasium, since there is a bathroom there as well. So that's the only thing I'd suggest if this is the way that it goes.
Caitlin, if I could, just on that point, you just got to take into consideration the live broadcast, right?
That was what I was going to say.
Yeah, okay.
So just to confirm, Dr. Metzler, that's only possible currently through the cafeteria, right? That's the only place we have that equipment.
I believe so. Mr. Flynn, Mike?
Yep, for the live broadcast, that's where the cameras are located.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead. Who was that?
I was just going to ask, is that a requirement to have it live broadcasted, or is that just what we've always done?
That's a good question.
I mean,
I think it's the best practice at a minimum. I don't know. I mean, I think we obviously have to record it.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, are we denying people access by not having it live? Some would argue. I don't know.
My suggestion is going to be if we could do it via Zoom or whatever instead. If we're going to do it live, to do it via Zoom versus on cable TV. That way, people can be included, and we can record it.
Yeah, there's obviously a number of ways. Oh, I'm sorry. Additional equipment.
Sorry, go.
So we talked about upgrading equipment and those sorts of things. So it's I just wanted that to be those are just throwing that out there. That's one of the things we want to take into consideration. Obviously, there are going to be adjustments we need to make, and some sacrifices or not, right? So if we just have to kind of weigh out the pros and cons and then do what's in the best interest of the greatest number of people. Correct?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I mean, I don't want us to make a decision. I don't think we have all the information to make that decision right now. Obviously, and I want to be working with our moderator to get that figured out. I wanted to be able to have the board speak to it. I wanted to start getting information out that this is what we're trying to figure out. It's pretty hard. I mean, there's also, even if we were to make it work in the gym, one of the things that I had a conversation about was as a public body, we have to allow people access. And there's been some discussion about the fact that we potentially can't require masks be worn. So that's an even bigger concern. And if we are to do that, then we would potentially need to provide a separate space for anybody who was not going to abide by a mask. And that's a whole nother piece of the school that might have to be cleaned. That being said, I have a lot of concerns about the confusion behind this alternative process. I don't like it at all. And then obviously there's the third piece I mentioned where we have legislation where we don't know what's going to happen there yet, which could be a whole nother option. So I think that's it for that one. We're not making decisions. We're talking out our options and going from there.
Caitlin, just to
I don't
clarify,
know if anybody else.
Just a question about what you're saying about masks. You were saying that we couldn't mandate masks?
Because so technically it's the same thing with voting day. The town could not mandate that people wear masks in to vote because the issue is you're denying someone their voting rights. Now, the town, I believe, had put some precautions in place, like I don't believe it was actually a huge issue from what I understand from like the primary and then the November election but you have to have a contingency plan and we can't force somebody, again, this is my understanding of talking to both the moderator, to talking to Neil, and I believe I've talked to Dean about it as well earlier. I think Mr. Dowd has had discussions about this too.
Okay.
So yeah, we can't make people, basically.
I thought because of the mandate from the governor, that's why I was questioning it. Because at this
Well,
now,
what is that, 100? Yeah, so I mean, if we had over 100, I guess it's just that number varies so much as far as deliberative each year. There are times when we have 20 people, and there are times, you're right, we may end up with over 100, and then I guess we would fall under that mandate. So
Thank you.
But technically, we could have a Zoom up on the screen in the cafeteria. And whoever wants to go, they can go, but none of us have to be there. As long as we give them an option to be there.
I don't know.
No, that's,
I don't know how that,
we have a bare bones crew, just someone to check people in and some people doing the TV, and no one else is there.
I'm
They
gonna,
okay, so here's my only issue with that. And this is, you're right, we could do that. My only issue with that, I am not comfortable asking someone else to be there if I won't be there. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not comfortable asking somebody to do check-in or set with multiple people. I don't know.
and Caitlin, we get into, if we're looking at district staff, right, you're getting into another memorandum of understanding about, we're not going to leave the building up for grabs. We're not just going to open the doors and say, we hope everything's there tomorrow, right? I mean, we need to make sure it's secure, and, you know, there's staff that would need to be directed to be there. What their comfort level is with that would be a factor too, right? I mean, you're talking film.
Yeah.
So, you know, different people that are now subjected to it. It gets so complicated with trying to make sure that everybody's needs are being met. So anyway, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I mean, this is kind of like to be determined. We have to get a little more information and see how things progress. So, okay, that being said, that's it for current business. I don't have any old or other business, and I would like to ask for a motion for a non-public under 91A : hold on. Wait, it's on the agenda because Melissa has me prepared. Hold on. Should have this memorized by now. 91A:3, paragraph 2C, reputation. So I'm looking for a motion for that.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Melissa, will you please call a roll call vote?
Ms. Malcolm,
Yes.
Mrs. Parnell,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney,
Yes.
Mrs. Yusenka.
Yes.
Thank you. Time is 9:16.
I think I need to send people a link, and I forgot to do that earlier, and I'm really sorry.
Would you like me to send one out?
If you don't mind, Mike, sorry.
Yep.
Should have emailed you about that.
We're closing this meeting, correct?
Yes, we are. We're not making any decisions.
Should be in your inbox.
Thanks, Mike. All right, good night, everyone. We will not be coming back with any decisions.